This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has announced the sale of $197.71 million in foreign exchange to authorized dealers. This move follows the tariff increase announced by U.S. President Donald Trump that has triggered a period of adjustment across global markets. Now, the sum is going to be injected into the economy to stabilize the Nigerian foreign exchange market. Joining the conversation this morning is economist Adegboyega Adebajo. Mr. Adebajo, good morning, and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Good morning, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
It's a pleasure to have you, sir. So by the time the CBN announced this on Saturday, the 4th of April, I think it was, and as of closing yesterday, trading-wise, the naira to the dollar, the exchange rate closed somewhere around 1,628 naira to the dollar. It seems as if the situation might be developing even faster than the CBN's measures. Would you say that's the case?
Well, I mean, the figures do not lie. It's obviously the case. Actually, as of yesterday, the price of oil fell below the $60 mark. And there are indications that it may just drop a bit more. That has an impact, not just in terms of what Nigeria can earn, but in terms of how we build up the foreign exchange reserves we have. But you would expect the CBN to intervene the way they did. And the amount of money is not so much, 197 million. I would have thought it would be a bit more. Now, the reason for that is clear and simple, given what the tariffs are doing. Exporters into the U.S. will probably have to pay a lot more in terms of the tariffs to get their goods in. We know Dangote exports jet oil and some other products from his refinery. That may be about some of the largest. The total volume of trade is not so significant compared to what we import from the U.S., but it's still a lot. And every single exporter to the U.S. is going to have to pay more because of the tariffs. Usually, this will affect the prices because they're going to be asking for repayment. When I say repayment, in the sense that in the U.S., those goods are going to be a lot more expensive. But for one thing, the demand for dollars would have gone up with the tariffs increase. And let's just see what happens, because it's interesting that we're demanding a lot more dollars, and the price of crude oil is dropping. So this is going to call on a lot of the wit the CBN gentlemen have, and I'd like to see how they respond to this. I have no doubt they'll respond appropriately, but there's so many aspects of the economy that such responses could affect.
Well, Mr. Adebajo, the Minister of the Economy has said that the impact of the tariffs on Nigeria will be minimal at best. I wonder how his comments tie in, especially with what the CBN is doing. Do you see that same stance reflected in the CBN's latest move?
Well, I guess when he says minimal, he's probably comparing the volume of exports to the U.S. to the rest of the world. And that makes it minimal. Like I said, in terms of the balance of payments, we tend to import a lot more from the U.S. than we export to the U.S. So it's understood. But nevertheless, the size of our basket, and when I say basket, think about the FX reserves, the trading that goes on, and the fact that practically everything we do internationally is tied to the dollar. That would certainly affect the exchange rate. And I'm not surprised it's gone up to 1,600. But that I hope that is a spike which will sort of ease out, and the naira will recover in the coming weeks. But that all depends on what's available for the demand.
Mr. Adebajo, I hear the authorities when they say that we've got minimal exposure in terms of just direct trade with the U.S. But perhaps part of my trouble is You've already mentioned the cost of crude on the international market. We're seeing the exchange rate also react. Many of the global experts say that with the cost of crude hitting or dipping below $60 a barrel, it's usually an indication that a global recession is underway. So there are all these other external shocks that are unfolding, and we've got direct or indirect exposure to it. The minister is already saying that we will need to re-examine the 2025 budget. Over the last year or so, there are certain economic metrics that we've been able to build up, including our net reserves surpassing $23 billion, I think it was, that the CBN announced. It does beg the question of whether these gains that we made in the last year or so will be reversed, and just how significant that reversal would probably be.
You're absolutely right, Nabila. And a very interesting thing is that, no matter what you do within your own macroeconomy, it's a global village now, as they say. Once you're involved in international trade, there are all these other shocks that can affect you. I've noticed over the past couple of days from reading the news that a few countries are coming together to talk about negotiating certain privileges with the U.S. government. It may not be a total privilege, so to say, or total reduction. It may be certain specifics based on how critical they are to certain industries in America. So maybe that's one of the things we need to look at in terms of what are we exporting to the U.S. that is significant in terms of volume, based on the entire package of what we send over there. And maybe then that can be negotiated just so that the impact is much more reduced. And that's what we need to start thinking of. How does this affect us? And how can we reduce the impact so that the stability and the gains for 2025 are not wiped away? One thing I've been expecting really is that given the kind of situation we have, ideally, the value of the US dollar should drop internationally. But we all know that even when we see instances of the value dropping, we do not see that in terms of the Naira appreciating. And that's because of the dependency we have on crude oil and US dollar sales.
Right. I guess perhaps for now a final question would be what your advice would be to the subnationals, because we're seeing the federal government react and respond accordingly. But the subnationals, I'm not certain that I've heard so much from them. Their own budgetary reviews. There was the announcement that our total public debt rose to 144.67 trillion naira, and this is a combination of debt from the federal and also the local, the subnational levels. Pardon me. What do you think the next move should be from that end?
Well, certainly the debt figures are quite disconcerting, especially if there's no indication of them being reduced. And if the oil prices continue to drop and revenue decreases, who knows what will happen to the federal allocations that happen. Once that does happen, the funds that go to the subnationals will reduce, and that's when they're going to have to start thinking about it. But typically, it's not exactly a pleasing thing to say. Most subnationals do not respond to these things because they are used to the fact that when budgets are presented, they hardly ever perform up to 100% of the budget. So they're not going to spend all they plan to spend, and they're not going to receive all they plan to receive. They know that all the time. Subnationals tend to prioritize what they spend money on based on what has been received. And that's the way the budgets have been operating in subnationals. They leave all the planning to the federal government itself in terms of how it deals with these external shocks. So it's just like an individual saying, well, on a day-to-day basis, I'll determine what I spend money on, and if there's anything left to keep, based on what I receive. So it doesn't matter what I plan to spend. I'll just adjust myself to what I have. And that's the typical approach I see the subnationals taking.
Mr. Adegboyega, thank you very much for your time and expertise on this conversation. Adegboyega Adebajo is an economist who joined us this morning to speak on the Central Bank of Nigeria's injection of $197.7 million to stabilize Nigeria's foreign exchange market.